Hi, this is a video of a river trip that I took in 2015 from Pearce Ferry boat ramp on the Arizona side of the Colorado River on down to Lake Mead, and I took out at South Cove. This trip was about 18 and a half miles in length, and it was a neat trip because this section of the river doesn't see very much traffic. I called the ranger station at Lake Mead to make sure that it would be okay if I dropped off my canoe at the Pearce Ferry boat ramp. Ordinarily, no one is allowed to put in there. I placed my boat underneath some reeds under a camouflage army tarp, and then I took my car back to South Cove, and then I got on my mountain bike and I rode over the hill and back down to Pearce Ferry, put my bike in the canoe, and I was off. Now, I had done some pre-trip scouting on Google Earth, and I knew that about a mile below Pearce Ferry ramp, I was going to run into Pearce Ferry Rapids itself. And I hadn't been able to find any relevant current data about the condition of the river at that point. Well, it turned out that it was a river-wide Class 5 rapid, and it wasn't anything that I was going to be able to run in my canoe with my bike and no flotation. So this is video that I shot from up on top of a bluff. I'm just downriver a little bit from Pearce Ferry, and I'm looking at what would be the spot where I would come out at. I pulled out on River Right, which was kind of a mistake. It made for a fairly difficult portage. It was about 95 degrees that day. The snakes were out, and neither riverside would have been a very nice side to do the portage on. But as you can see, there are these big sand bluffs, and it's about 150 foot down to the river level there. And in this part of the video, I'm just kind of talking to myself about the rapid and what I thought it was going to be like. I had thought that there would be a chicken route on River Right that I might be able to just float through, but I found that that wasn't the case. You can see it's a little pour over right there. So I floated down, and I pulled out on a great big sandy beach, and I walked up to the top of this bluff. I saw a couple snakes, and I just sort of scouted the whole thing out, and it would have been a bummer to have to abandon the trip, so I just decided to go ahead and portage all my stuff, even though it was probably a quarter mile or half mile up to the top of the bluff and then over to the edge where I ended up just throwing all my stuff down the other side. There's cattle in the area, although I didn't see any. There's cattle trails all over, and I was able to follow the cattle trails, and I had a good vision, so I didn't step on any of the Mojave Greens or Western Diamondbacks that I saw. This is an almost 18 and a half mile trip, and in the 18 and a half miles, I didn't see a single sign of any other people. Most of the commercial traffic and raft traffic that comes down the Grand Canyon pulls out at Pearce Ferry boat ramp, and then the Pearce Ferry boat ramp is closed to boat traffic for put-ins, and the only people that would really be very capable of running Pearce Ferry Rapids would be competent kayakers. And because the majority of the trip is just flat water, punctuated with that big rapid at the top, no one ever runs this section of river. Down at the bottom at Lake Mead South Cove, if you try to head upriver, because of the low water levels, there's a pour over, and the river access is choked on either side by great big boulders. So it's basically closed to upstream motor traffic from Lake Mead, and it's pretty much closed to downstream traffic from Pearce Ferry. But like I said, I called the ranger station. They said there'd be no problem with me putting in my canoe there. I loaded for an overnight trip, and I had anticipated spending the night along the way. But when I got on the water, I started to make real good time, and I just pushed through in one long day. I left my house at about 6:30. I was dropping off my canoe about 7:30. I had finished my shuttle by probably 9 o'clock in the morning and was on the water by probably 9:15 or 9:30. And like I said, within 1 mile of river travel, I encountered the rapids, so I pulled off. And this is me walking down the sand beach back to the canoe. There it is with all its stuff in it. And I had to go up that big bluff and take all my stuff. I would say it took me probably 5 trips to get everything up to the top. So you can see there I've thrown most of my stuff down. I had dry bags and I just kind of threw everything down the cliff, and then I hooked all my cam straps together to lower the canoe down. I really wasn't very well prepared for this part, but I thought, if I was at work, we would just make do. So I suppose since it's my day off, we can just make do. So I used a dead salt cedar stump as sort of a capstan, and I wrapped the cam straps around it, and I lowered the canoe down as best I was able. In the process, I managed to have to drop the canoe and let it slide partway down, and it broke the thwart out of the side of the canoe. My canoe, by the way, is a used rental boat I bought off of Craigslist. It's a Mad River 16-foot canoe, and it's a really nice canoe. I don't have any complaints about it or its durability or handling or anything. So anyway, this is me dropping my stuff off. I left the cooler in there. It took about 6 trips up and down to get all the stuff to the top of the bluff and then throw it all down and then get back on the water. So this is just me trying to figure out. The canoe's only about halfway down to where I know it's going to come to rest, and my concern is that if I just let it go, it'll launch out there like a sled and get into the water and start floating away faster than I'm able to get to it. So I just kind of held it in my hand and I jumped down the bluff myself. And anyway, we got down there in more or less one piece, and then I rigged all my stuff together. But at this point, I'd begun to have a reasonable level of apprehension that Google Earth and maps and the very, very minimal amount of firsthand information I had gotten regarding river conditions might be totally useless to me, that I could find at any time some sort of impassable obstacle. And at that point, I wouldn't be panicked, but I would be faced with kind of stashing my boat, taking my bike, and then just walking due south back to the road, and then finally back to South Cove. So this shot is, there were a bunch of big catfish and different kinds of fish, and there were some big boils that I saw here in the water of some pretty good sized fish. Watching this now, it makes for pretty uninteresting viewing, and I can't see where the fish were. But they were there. In fact, this might be a real interesting section of river to fish because it never sees any activity. Like I said, in the 18 and a half miles, the only sign I saw of people was one discarded 5-gallon bucket that was washed up on the shore. Because the water levels have dropped so low, you can see that you're basically looking at eroded sand bluffs on river right and river left, and that continues for the vast majority of the river trip. There was quite a bit of wind on this day, and the bank would slough and let go, and then it would spin up dirt devils. And anybody who spent time in the desert has seen dust devils on the land, but it was an interesting thing to see dust devils spin up and then move across the water. Parts of the trip had kind of an eerie, isolated feel to them. But there was certainly opportunity for all kinds of side trips. There were lots of little canyons and slots. It made for kind of interesting boating. I mean, it's essentially flat water, but for the most part, I had plenty of current to push me downstream. And then in some sections, there were great big boils that would form and spin the boat and turn it around, and sort of randomly occurring kind of eddy fences and stuff. And it made for, not challenging boating, but you kind of had to keep your wits about you. As the day progressed, the wind picked up. In this part of Arizona, 15 to 20 mile an hour wind all day is a pretty common occurrence. But on this trip, by the end of the day, I think I was looking at like 30 to 35 mile an hour winds blowing just dead upstream. And unfortunately, that coincided with me kind of reaching the river mouth where it empties into Lake Mead, and I had probably 2 to 3 foot wind chop waves with this 30-mile-an-hour wind just blowing steadily into my face. As you exit the river channel and get into Lake Mead proper, there's a great big river-wide eddy fence, and for an unwary boater, I mean, it could easily tip you over. By that point, the wind was blowing so hard that no combination of positioning or balance or J-stroke or anything would keep the canoe going straight. There's one of those like dirt devils that was spinning up on the river, like I was mentioning. What I had to do was slide all my stuff to the back of the boat, and then I had to sit in the very front of the canoe with my knees on the bottom of the deck to put all the weight forward. And then it was just a marathon of paddling, just stroke after stroke after stroke. And it wasn't. If you were at work, it wouldn't be so bad. For a day off, it wasn't the funnest way to spend my time. But these are just some random shots of the sort of canyon sort of environment that you're in. It's not real tall and it's not real close like it would be in the Black Canyon, but you have this place just utterly to yourself. Like no one comes here. There's no fire rings. There's no soda pop cans. There's no plastic wads of fishing line. There's just nothing like that. And I didn't come across any rams. I didn't come across any coyotes or eagles, but I did see some cattle, and that was about it. I'd really like to do this trip again, maybe even as an overnighter, and take a lot more time to get out and explore some of this stuff on the way down. As I continued on down and I got close to a feature on the map marked as Iceberg Canyon, I did come across a abandoned aluminum sled, like the kind that commercial operators take tourists up and down the river in. I haven't been able to find any information as far as how old that boat is or when it was lost or the circumstances under which it was lost. It easily could have broken a mooring and floated downriver. It would seem unusual for a boat like that to get swamped with a full load of tourists on board. But anyway, that was a pretty neat thing to find. You don't always find a shipwreck on the river, although I guess shipwreck is maybe a little sensational. Anyway, all in all, it was a real fun trip. There you go. There's my canoe, and then there's the wrecked sled in the background, and just some more kind of generic shots of what the float trip looked like on the way. There's me checking out the boat, and for all intents and purposes, it looked like a person could shovel it out, pump it out, float it, and get on down to Lake Mead.